I have a super bright desk light.
Hi, you guys. Welcome to Dive into
morning.
Worldbuilding. And today we're talking about social norms of contagion. And I can't even remember who among you suggested this, but it's awesome. I've been looking forward to this ever since somebody suggested it.
I think it was me and Brian at some point.
Go, Kat and Brian. So this is actually really a fascinating one for bunches of reasons. But I think one of the things about it that really gets me is it's really a deep world building kind of issue. It shows you how an underlying concept can affect behavior in a really widespread and thoroughgoing way. Right?
Yeah.
So moments ago, there had been discussion of a large rat problem. We're not talking about that, but it did make me think of the plague, which is not a bad place to start.
Awesome.
We're talking about social norms of contagion. Like back in when the plague was going on, people didn't know about germ theory. And so there were lots of ideas about how one might catch the plague, and very few of them had anything to do with rats or fleas. Right?
Now I'm like completely going far afield and into like the South Korean myth of fan death.
Okay, go there.
The idea that if you leave your just electric circulating room fan on overnight, that you'll die.
Wow.
Maybe air in the room or something like that. I'm not entirely certain of all the specific rationale assigned around that, but there is a certain widespread belief that you have to turn the fan off at night or not go to sleep in front of a functioning fan, which, given muggy summers there, is kind of scary. I think
wow.
Scary.
Yeah, I think you're more likely to die if you didn't.
I'm gonna say that is legit because one time I fell asleep with the fan on and had like almost like a sinus infection in the morning, and it was like right before Comic-Con, and it sucked.
Well,
so I'm gonna
say other things going on.
Totally a thing.
I totally buy forced air and dehydration bad.
Well, you know,
but
if you're dehydrated, that's problematic as well. But
that's not quite contagion, but yeah.
Now, can I ask you a question, Kat?
Yeah.
You know the idea that there's an idea in Japan that when you go to sleep, you should have your tummy covered.
Oh yeah.
Is that?
It's not just when you go to sleep. There's a very deep-seated belief that you have to keep your core warm. And like my dad, to go out and do work in the Southern California winter, because he was one of the last of the Japanese American gardeners, would wear this like belly only sweater.
I've seen those in anime.
It was like a knit corselet. I mean, it was just a tube, right? And people would wear leg warmers, but he would wear a belly warmer.
Wow.
And it's a basic belief that you must keep your core warm, or you're just going to get chilled. And you know, it's not.
Is it a sickness
untrue.
kind of thing, or is it just sort of a general malaise kind of thing?
Basically, it's the idea that getting a chilled gut is the heart of a lot of ailments, I guess. Sort of in the same sort of you must keep your head covered concepts that other people have, but no, my mother was very concerned about making sure that we had warm tummies, and it was also believed that if you let your gut get too cold, you'd end up with digestive problems. So yeah, that's not so much contagion as just old wives' tales and assumptions about well-being.
Yeah. I didn't know whether it was somehow connected, but I thought it was an interesting thing that I had run into. And there's actually it's in a children's book that got translated into the US. about belly buttons. It's actually very cute, but I won't spend a lot of time on it. We can talk about it later.
You message me with that. That's interesting.
But so since we're in Asia, I'm going to mention the habit that people often have of when they're sick, wearing a face mask, which I think when Westerners go to Japan for the first time, they can consider that alarming, because in the US it's more like you wouldn't wear a face mask unless you were like, I don't know,
tuberculosis?
Had tuberculosis or something, right? It gives you the feeling of like, oh my gosh, this person is hecka dangerous, right? Somehow.
That's fascinating, because I've been on public transit with people like hacking their lungs out and kind of wondered, wow, you are just not able to stop yourself. And I'm really having these visions of aerosolized
Oh, absolutely.
And like,
it's counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah. I keep hoping that the other parts outside of Asia will end up being more on the everybody wear a face mask bandwagon, but it hasn't happened in decades. So
yeah,
I've kind of given up holding my breath for that. But related to that, what I find really fascinating is that I grew up with cover your mouth, and it was cover your mouth with your hand.
Yeah. Me too.
Now, my children have been trained by preschool and elementary school to sneeze into their elbows.
Yep.
So I don't know that that's actually reduced the amount of contagion around, but the logic is good.
I think the logic is good. Yeah.
You know, don't put it right into your hands where you're just gonna
put it on people, right?
All over everything, but,
not necessarily that you're going to put your hand on people all the time, but like there are a lot of ritualized hand touching behaviors that are less contagion spreading if you have not sneezed into your hand recently.
I've heard East Asians sort of being horrified by being in the West during cold and flu season, because they're like, and then you people touch each other.
Yeah.
You know, there's the whole European face kissing thing, and then there's the American handshakes, and it's all high contact compared to being in a culture where you just step back and bow or you know, bob the head. So is it lower contagion? I don't know, but it certainly fits into a headspace that, you know, you justify it by saying, well, you know, it's more hygienic.
Sure. Well, so it would be interesting to try to delve into whether rates of contagion were actually different. For example, between cough into your hand time and cough into your elbow time. I mean, but there are so many different factors, like whether you can reliably get the child to cough into their elbow, or whether they then just wipe their nose on their hand. You know, like there's a lot of there's a lot of unreliability in such behaviors. And I would also note that when I was teaching in a K through 8 school for the first time, I learned, I would like to say the hard way, that germs can actually live on papers for an extended period of time. So when you have sick kids in your class and they're handing in homework, you should actually keep your hands clean when you're grading, which is a lot harder than it sounds to remember.
I used to be the queen of hand sanitizer, and especially when I was waiting tables, I would use a copious quantity of hand sanitizer, and I did manage to not have any summer colds that year, so apparently that worked.
Ah.
But Yeah, my children are. I can really tell the difference between the adults who've been exposed to young children in the last 5 to 10 years and those of us who haven't.
Yes.
Because the adults have been slowly converting over to the elbow sneezing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big divide, and my children will look at adults who hand sneeze and sort of have this look of horror of, but.
Yeah.
So people are sort of appalled at the idea of people who are wearing masks and going out being, you know, you must be horribly contagious. You must have a terrible thing if you're wearing this mask. And yet Westerners will go out without masks with horribly contagious things.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the level of contagion is not the same thing as the severity of the illness. Something can be highly contagious and yet be a mild illness.
Right. Right.
Also, we have this culture in the West, and also in East Asia now, especially in other places, of even if you're sick, you must be heroic and make your way into the office.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Which means
and
it demands that everybody can do that.
I hadn't noticed it until I had a friend whose workplace has a very generous personal leave policy who refused to go into a work mini conference that had brought together people from all sorts of satellite offices from all over the country and possibly internationally that they were expected to be at. But my friend said, you know what, I'm sick, I'm pretty sure I'm contagious, I'm not going in, even though I could power through using, you know, over-the-counter drugs. And I just marveled at that for a moment. And then I realized that I have this internalized social norm that if you can possibly be upright, you have to be at work. And how much contagion does that actually create? Wow.
A lot. Yeah, a lot. If from a public health perspective, we could do a lot better than encouraging that cultural belief. I think it would be a lot better for many people on the long term if we had a little bit less of an expectation of go in when you're half dead. And in fact, it shows up in little tiny places, like the difference between having sick leave and personal leave days.
Right.
You guys are aware of the difference, right? So personal leave days is like some companies just say, well, you've got X number of personal leave days. You can use them for illness or you can use them for vacation, right?
Yeah, those are different things, though.
Well, here's the thing. So what will happen is a place with personal leave days is actually creating an artificial pressure for people to come into work when they're sick in order to maximize their vacation days.
It depends upon how many PTO days people are being given, actually.
Yeah.
Well, that's if they're being given any at all. I mean, not all workplaces will offer anything.
Mm-hmm.
Especially not paid, which is why people can't afford to take off when they're sick necessarily.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how specific kinds of let's see. Our general purpose sense of what a contagious disease is.
Ain't no secret.
Things are kind of echoey where you are, Sumiko.
I know. Sorry, hang on. It's been a long time.
Super.
Is that better?
It's getting better. I'd love to have you here. So, so far it's so good. Anyway, so like germ theory changed things a lot, right? So, there used to be the concept of the miasma, right? Where there were these sort of zones of air that would cause you to become ill. And there were things and that led to things like posies, or the kinds of things that you would you were supposed to keep yourself smelling nice things in order to keep yourself from getting sick.
Those plague doctor masks.
Yeah. They actually made sense on a level, right? If you understand the underlying germ concept that inspired them, right? And so these days we have an interesting thing going on with anti-vaccination folks, right? And so there are still competing concepts of contagion and the best way to handle it right now, in part because of the fact that the incidence of contagious diseases that you can vaccinate for has gone so far down. For example, recently, I mean, I'm used to sort of protect yourself from colds kind of approaches, right? So I have habits that I maintain in order to protect myself from colds. On the other hand, I was reintroduced to the kinds of quarantine procedures that are necessary for measles when my daughter not too long ago had a harmless rash and was told to stay out of the clinic and use the back door, and reading about recent measles outbreaks. Measles are way more contagious than colds. You can walk through a room with them and it will still be contagious hours later. It's pretty amazing, right? And so it's not just germ theory that changes things. It's also which diseases you've learned the proper procedures for, in a sense. Right?
I've been watching my friends going through quarantine procedures for lice, for hand, foot, and mouth disease, and also for scabies.
Wow.
And also ringworm. And they're all different. And the things that become normalized and not normalized, and things that have to be banned, and how much head-to-head contact children are engaging in casually all the time, until I live in a region where lice is just endemic. It's terrible. And for years we've been relying on chemical means to get rid of them, but now we of course have chemical resistant lice.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do except for just foam like mad, and now I understand.
Shave your head.
The little combs that too, but less popular for little girls. The close toothed combs that we find in all the archaeological artifacts that I didn't really understand, because they're not very good for actually combing snarls out of your hair. And I always wondered, why do we keep finding these close toothed combs?
Yeah.
And I realized, oh, those are lice combs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now I know.
Absolutely. And we had lice come through our school. And actually there are these new treatments out there that are heat treatments.
Right.
Which is very interesting to me.
Bed bugs.
Oh.
We should discuss bed bugs.
What?
We should discuss bed bugs.
We should discuss bed bugs. Okay.
I think we have
It's this whole
on
thing.
another hangout.
It's the most effective anti-bed bug treatment. And we've been using chemicals for a long time, and bed bugs are very, very chemically resistant. But they are still chemically vulnerable. They're vulnerable to heat. So the best thing to do is to put your stuff into an anti-bed bug oven. So I had a friend who was just going completely bananas from like a months and months long bed bug infestation in her home. a bunch of us kicked in for a fundraiser to get her an anti-bedbug home oven.
Wow.
And she started baking her stuff, and it really actually worked, because up until then she'd been having all of her stuff in trash bags in an effort to sort of starve them out, and it doesn't work as well as you'd hope.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have another friend who took one of those ovens and a bunch of tarps and things, and those reflective emergency blankets, the Mylar blankets,
Yeah.
and wrapped up a couch in that, and actually managed to rescue the couch.
Oh,
Wow.
Because I had a friend who had to who in despair gave up an heirloom bedstead because it had gotten infested. But you know, this is one of those nightmarish infestation things, because you pick it up, you go to somebody's house who has them, or you stay in lodging, or I mean, there was a scare on our public transit about whether or not some of our train cars had bed bugs, and it will really make you jumpy and a little crazed.
Yeah, yeah.
Like heat, we've discovered that heat works, which we think of as really a primitive solution, but
Hey, but it works. I mean, why do we cook? Right?
social theories of contagion.
Yeah, I mean, we have instances of things that could kill us in our food that we should cook it so that it doesn't get passed to us through our food.
We can talk about the great Wisconsin norovirus outbreak.
Oh no!
And how it's made that particular convention very, very wary about food safety.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, all of the Consuite volunteers have to have a ServSafe certification. It's really become an important thing to make sure that the food is held at safe temperatures, because nobody wants a repeat, because the outbreak that happened there actually was unique enough that it got its own name in the annals, and apparently the Wisconsin is part of the name of that particular strain now.
Oh no!
that's awkward.
Oh dear.
So that does not bode well.
Scary.
So Kalida had something interesting to say a minute ago in the sidebar, which I wanted to kind of come back to, which was about good bacteria and bad bacteria. Do you want to speak a little bit about that, Kalida? Oh, I can't hear you. That's all right. No, it seems like maybe it's maybe you're not hooked up somehow. Well,
Bummer,
because I wanted to talk about that, and I would rather have you do it than me. So in the sidebar here, Khalid is saying that bathing too much robs us of good bacteria that protect us from other bacteria, which I think is really interesting. No, I'm still not hearing you. I wonder why that would be.
We are discovering that eradicating the gut bacteria in the interest of taking antibiotics to deal with systemic infections is resulting in other problems.
Yeah.
Because we had not been prizing a healthy gut biome well enough. And so there's all these new treatments that involve transplanting gut bacteria through some...
Are you going to say it? I'm looking forward to you. How are you going to put it? Because my sister had to go through this.
excitingly gross ways.
Yep.
Excitingly gross ways, yes.
Fecal transplants.
There you go.
There you go.
Thank you,
We have no fear. We can say fecal transplants.
Which is what I'm going to do if the probiotics I'm on don't work. So it sounds pretty gross, but if you've ever had major gut issues, they kind of find someone with healthy gut bacteria and transplant enough of it, which you get from that person's feces. And they transplant enough of that gut bacteria that it can colonize your own and replace the defective flora in your gut. As far as I understand, try probiotics first.
Now I'm assuming, like, okay, question. Is it surgical? And if not, what end does it go in?
I assume it goes in the end that's closest to the gut bacteria.
I would.
One
Okay.
of the problems, so I think they've tried it both ways. And one of the issues is that the bacteria in the stomach part is different than what needs to be in the closer to the
lower
end part.
intestine.
Like the lower intestine. Yeah, got it.
Right.
Okay.
So the intestinal parts have a different biome, and there's all this experimentation about can you make it dissolve on the other end, but also people don't really want to stick it in their mouths.
Yeah.
So it's still very young technology.
Yeah. And I know that if you
or a very old
on
technology.
hardcore antibiotics for some really critical reason, and you wipe out an important part of your natural gut biome, you can actually become extremely ill to the point of dying if you don't have those bacteria replaced, because a lot of our bacteria are critical for things like digestion. You know.
Yeah, your intestines play a big role in like the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
So that was important.
Well, so okay, let's let's go take a little left turn here at Albuquerque and say okay, we've got all this really interesting stuff. It's all really interesting stuff. What are we going to do with it in a story? I mean, obviously there's obviously the issue of, well, historical fiction where this stuff can be, say, you know, oh, well, this is set during the time of the plague, and I've got a time traveler who knows germ theory and blah, blah, blah. So that would be one way of making it, I guess, the centerpiece of a story. But even if you don't have this as a centerpiece of a story, it could potentially be something very interesting.
Well, I think it's interesting to keep to remember there's artifacts that persist in society after dealing with like a plague or dealing with some particular contagion, and those artifacts take on they become like parts of social etiquette. They become parts of maybe architecture, or like the way you lay out a city or lay out a building even. And I think that's interesting to include those details to provide that depth of history in your world.
Bless you.
Yeah.
Like where you
I was
put
actually thinking of
wells.
bless you, Gesundheit.
Where you put wells. Oh, and you know that you have actual plumbing?
Yeah.
So chloride is not a thing.
But I mean, even quickly, just to talk about what do you do when you sneeze?
Yeah.
And
that's more likely to appear too.
But that's a cultural artifact of a contagion response.
Yeah. And does somebody say bless you? Right? I mean, right. Americans are almost obsessive about saying bless you when you sneeze.
I was trained to say Gesundheit. Because my mom took German in college.
Or some reasonable equivalent thereof. I don't mean that phrase specifically. But like I had to teach myself to shut up when I was in Japan because you can't say bless you. Doesn't work.
Why wouldn't you just ignore it like a reasonable person?
Exactly. And then I'm going to actually tell you that there is a contagious disease in my novel, and it is the perception is that it is transmitted by touch. And I am not, digging super, super deep into the details of how something would be transmitted by touch but it's not a respiratory thing, basically. But you don't want to touch somebody who has this. And so that actually affects a lot of things about how the story unfolds, because people are trying not to touch each other. And in fact, one of my characters starts an entire fashion trend by wearing gloves to a party where she knows infected people will be attending. And so it actually turns into this whole thing. And it's exactly what you said, Brian. 30 years later, people are still wearing gloves. So it's kind of fun to play around with that stuff.
Oh, and Lecky built that into the Ratch, right? Where they,
yeah.
they think that bare hands are obscene.
Yeah.
And we don't discuss why, but it's there. I'm also thinking about, as when we were talking about architecture, I grew up being told that the ground outside was dirty and that you had to have a quarantine between outside dirt and inside clutter. And so the architecture I grew up with was supposed to have a very clear entryway system. And my parents managed to sort of artificially create one in, my dad cut a hole in from one of the bedrooms to the garage, but he made sure there was a threshold and there was shoe boxes outside the, and when I say shoe boxes, I don't mean the things that come in from the store. I mean like a bookshelf, but for shoes.
Yeah.
Outside the garage door and also in the entryway. But in Southern California, as they've been accommodating areas that have more East Asian buyers who have retained their East Asian cultural roots, they're actually building houses that have that kind of cultural sensitivity in mind.
That's interesting, yeah.
As there is in East Asia. That, I mean, I find it really challenging here because I live in a place where people think that taking off your shoes is terrible and asking people to take off their shoes is rude. And so it's kind of contagion theory, but it's a social norm of what you do. And there's also like the rules of what you do with your plates and knives and chopsticks and tableware. And
yeah,
the fact that like passing condiments is a common thing in the West was a little startling to me when I was a child.
Oh, interesting.
And again, those are little things about touch.
Yeah.
So there's a thing that I think is mostly in the Northeast or the Northeast. I don't know exactly the details. A mudroom.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know what the rest of it is that goes with the tradition of a mudroom. I mean, you take off your muddy stuff and you leave it there. And then, you know, your coats and your boots and whatnot.
Well, beach houses will often have a sand room.
So what is in the mud room or the sand room that you put on before you proceed into the house? And that I don't know about mud rooms. I should know, but
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that in Japan there are zones that have different kinds of slippers.
Right. There's the bathroom slippers.
Yeah.
Which are a problem if you're a person who's considered outsized for the local norm. Because there's one size of bathroom slippers that everybody's slipping their feet into usually. And if your feet don't slip into that, it's a problem.
Yeah. Well, it fits over my big toe.
Yeah. So, mudrooms. Having moved myself into mudroom territory, I can say that usually what happens is that you just have warm socks on and you just go around in your sock feet. Which for me is a problem because I hate socks. And some people keep grippy bottom socks for their guests to take and to just buy cheap grippy bottom socks that they're happy for their guests to take home with them. And there's also the sort of Martha Stewart basket of slippers thing.
Yeah.
I've seen 3 different solutions for that.
I wonder if thing about taking off shoes, because in fact, I remember the change that happened in my area between why would anyone ever ask you to take off your shoes and, well, it's perfectly normal for somebody to ask you to take off your shoes. Like, I mean, I wonder if the taking off the shoes thing was sort of like a nobody would ask you to take off your clothes kind of thing, right? Probably. I mean, it's obviously a peripheral item of clothing, but
I have friends for whom their boots are a very integral part of their outfit, and they feel really irritated to have to show off their socks.
Yeah.
Because they don't expect their socks to ever be shown, in the sort of sense of, why would you care what kind of underwear I'm wearing?
Yeah.
And yet,
I noticed a big change in the culture of workmen coming in, or repair people coming in, and they used to just tromp in with their boots, and then sometime during the middle, they started wearing like boot covers.
Yeah, it's true.
In sort of that clean room sense, and making sure they wouldn't track into your house. So that was a big cultural change, because I seem to have vague memories of my mother sort of dithering about what to do, and like laying down ratty towels in the path to the refrigerator or something, so that
okay, so I'm going to read what Khalida has to say, because I want to make sure she's being heard, even though she has no microphone. She says, we remove our shoes in the home and request others to remove their shoes as well. In a Muslim home, you may pray in any room of the house. Therefore, walking around the house in outside shoes would dirty a potentially sacred space. So outside shoes in the house are a no. Thank you for saying that, Khalida. Yeah, the reasons behind this stuff are really interesting.
I really think it's interesting how some of the points that we adopt culturally based on like our reaction, either like sometimes they're practical, like having the lepers go to a particular place to keep the leprosy from spreading. I mean, it seems like a practical concern, but a lot of them are also based on fear, or a lot of them are based on like religion or some spirituality, and how, depending on what particular motivation it is that we adopt it, how it persists.
Well, and I think, in fact, that it's not a one-way street there, right? Because I think that you have things like, and it's too bad Cliff's not here to speak to this, but I think you have things like kosher, where there was probably a health reason behind it initially, but it got built into the religion at a particular era, and then it was retained as a cultural practice, even when the contagion-related necessity for the practice was no longer present. Oh, you might know a little bit about that, Morgan. Though I know you're less close to Judaism than Cliff is.
Or Kat.
Oh, that's true. Kat.
I am only culturally adjacent.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think that there are two reasons for kashrut. Two points. One is, yes, there are some things that you don't eat because it's not safe, or it hasn't been safe. And some of it is just to distinguish us from those who are not us. And we don't eat the same thing these other people who are not us eat. Is a relatively harmless, well, I don't know, until you get into the economy of food.
People are dying over that in India, though. It becomes a very deeply held belief. And also, right now, Australia, and I think Khalida might have more to say about this, in Australia, there's an ongoing fight about halal. And how prevalent halal is allowed to become in the public sphere. Yeah,
maybe relative is, but not. I'd like to know more about that, but this isn't really the maybe that's a topic we could do sometime.
I would sort of loosely tie that in by talking about mimetic contagion.
Sorry?
Mimetic contagion, that this is food, that's not food, is one of those shibboleths that divides in-group and out-group. And so, fear of disease is also one of the things that gets used as a in-group, out-group thing, where there's always that, there are traditionally marginalized groups that are thought of as being disease-ridden.
Yeah.
And it's one of the common slurs. And, we need to get rid of that population because they are bringing disease. And it's especially a thing that would happen to more nomadic groups by the more settled groups.
Yeah.
Because it is true that travel brings more but now that we're doing that, we find ourselves still engaging in the discriminatory and marginalizing already marginalized people patterns as opposed to implicating world travelers. So it's not, oh, you know, Chad just came back from Italy. And in fact, in LA, one of the measles outbreaks happened because a child had gone to Italy, contracted measles there, had been on the plane, come back to Los Angeles with measles, and then spread it in their local environs. But when we talk about these things, the politicians like to use traditionally marginalized groups instead. And that's like throughout the written course of history, it's always the outsiders who are blamed.
Yeah.
And it's partly a case of because they don't follow our local norms for contagion, so therefore they must be the contagion vector.
Right.
And it gets particularly pernicious in cases like blaming Muslims when there's so much, and I don't want to explain over somebody who has lived experience there, but there's so much hygiene tradition built into the religious practice. It's really horrible to implicate that in claims of filth. It's deeply insulting.
I think it's really important to note that hygiene is built into religious practice. Because frankly, that is a thing that you could do in a fictional work that would be very, very interesting.
Shinto religious practice is about, I don't know, some large percentage, mostly about contagion and purity. So using salt as a purification, about washing hands as you come into ritual spaces. And it's true of a lot of religions that washing yourself as you come into a sacred space is a time-honored religious practice.
Yep.
So if you're building a religion into your culture,
hand washing before meals is there's a blessing for hand washing before meals in Judaism.
Yeah, and it's always a good plan.
yeah. And people are or were, when I was growing up, taught to wash their hands for meals. There was no blessing, and because I grew up not really very observant, but it's not just Jewish kids who were taught that.
So yeah, let's see. Well, we have about 4 minutes left.
It shows up in things like nail polish and ideas about nail polish.
Tell me about that.
It can hide grime. And so there are cultures that have a prescription against nail polish because you can't see what's trapped. But it also shows up in certain kinds of professions where you're not supposed to do that to your nails or grow them long because of contagion issues.
Well,
so hide.
Yeah.
I know there's a company that's designing nail polish for Muslims now. And it has particular properties that are very specific to why nail polish wasn't considered a good idea in the first place. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the sidebar here again because I want to hear Khalida. Ablutions with each of the 5 daily prayers, ritual bath after sex, blessings in washing the mouth, especially when fasting, ablution before touching the Quran. Yes, no nail polish because it prohibits complete ablution. Very interesting.
I'm wondering, I've never read an account of what happened between the Europeans and the Moors and in that sort of Christian versus Muslim cultural clash, given the European standards of the time as we understand them based on literature versus the things that must surely have been going on within the Muslims of the time because of how deeply ingrained it is into the religious practice.
Yeah.
And I can see norms of contagion becoming like a central point to a story.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Sorry, I'm trying to be quiet because I feel like I've talked too much.
No, you don't. You don't. And that's a lot to think about. And a religion that builds up those kinds of habits, Islam or Judaism, that if it's the dominant system, that is in control of things like infrastructure and provides a dominant architecture, and then you've got those things in place, and at some point you might not remember why they're there. They're the norm, and they're not necessarily not everybody will realize that they originate from the religion. Was that at all articulate?
I think what you just said is, if a religiously founded hygiene practice becomes secularized, people can lose the connection to the religious origins and just secularize the tradition without understanding where it came from.
But if it's, which is pretty much true of anything, but if it is hygiene related, sleep.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, this is sort of,
because Brian was saying earlier about
grow out of various different sources, but they're not always consciously connected back to those sources.
Yeah, like the gloves. You have a practice that remains, that was instituted for a particular reason, and may or may not be relevant in the current situation, but it's there.
Yeah.
The way we build houses, the way we dress, the way we touch people or don't touch people.
I actually have a really concrete example of that, which is that I think that my mother's explanation for why we didn't wear shoes in the house was both true and untrue, because one of the other reasons why you wouldn't wear outside shoes into a home in Japan traditionally would be in a place with rice straw mats with tatami. It is the enemy of tatami and will make tatami degrade much faster because it's not as durable a flooring surface as, say, tile or carpet or even dirt or many other things. And so I think that the contagion theory is probably true and possibly the only rational thing to carry forward into a place that doesn't have tatami mat flooring. But people can end up retaining a contagion theory when actually there was a different practical reason.
Yeah. So Khalida is remarking that Muslims are even required to wash after using a toilet, which is difficult in public bathrooms, because you have to wash more than just your hands. Is that what I'm understanding? Okay.
In Southeast Asia, places where there's a mixed Muslim and non-Muslim population, there's more of a prevalence of washing tools that allow varying faiths to engage in their after toileting practices in a way that it made me really notice how much Muslims are not integrated into our culture here in North America.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you for that clarification, Khalida. I'm going to throw a whole wrench into everything, because I'm going to veer us right at the end into something that's massive. But I was thinking of how beauty standards were affected by contagion in the era of consumption. The beautiful waif-like woman was in part became admired because there were so many people who had tuberculosis, and so that's a really strange influence that contagious disease has had on cultural practices.
There's also beauty marks because of syphilis in the French court.
Ah, okay. Yeah, see, I'm sure that's something one could go on for a very long time with, but we don't have any more time. Well, strangely enough, it was the wayfish woman that was appreciated. Yeah, I'm not sure why one would have argued for that when they were, but I guess there were just a lot of people who had tuberculosis. I don't know.
It's a class issue.
Okay. Higher class. All right. Makes sense. I am not deep into that, but class issue was one of the things that was coming to my mind when that was mentioned. So, all right, you guys, we are at the end of our hour, and you guys are awesome. And this is a really cool topic, and I'm going to be very happy to have this on our video collection. Thank you all for being here, and also thank you all for persisting despite technical problems. Spencer, thank you for keeping on coming back, and Kelly, thank you for all of the things that you contributed despite having no microphone. So I appreciate you all, and next week is going to be the beginning of December, and I think I had something in mind. I think maybe I wanted to do portraying children.
Ooh.
So let's talk about portraying children next week. All right. So as far as I know, we don't have a guest until December 12th. So that would be the week after next. And I believe it's Rebecca Quang who will be on. She's going to be having a novel come out really soon. And I'm excited to talk to her. And in the meantime, we will talk about portraying children next week. All righty. Awesome. I'm going to stop the broadcast.